Welcome to the Calm Analytics channel. I'm Boris Diesenghausen. It's December 21st, and today we have a very interesting episode. So, in this episode, in Russia, war heroes have suddenly started dying from unnatural causes. In Moscow, the leader of the Espanola PMC was mysteriously eliminated, and a general close to Putin has disappeared. Could it be that the Kremlin has started purging its own favorites? Peskov voiced an absolutely cosmic lie about Putin. Meanwhile, the US has begun a naval blockade and the physical seizure of Maduro's tankers. They're depriving the dictator of his last sources of money. How a simple bus driver in Caracas became a dictator and how he slowly lost his mind. Strange facts from the dictator's life, and I'll tell you all about it today. How Maduro consults with birds, spends the night in a mausoleum, and travels through time. This is not a joke. Russia has basically taken its gold to a giant pawn shop. A record-breaking sell-off of gold reserves to China, and this signals collapse. That very liquid Kremlin stash has drastically increased its sales of physical gold to China. What's going on? That's what today's episode is about. And not only that, if this is your first time on this channel, welcome, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. Let's start with the fact that the general who received the Hero of Russia award, the highest honor of the Russian Federation, from Putin himself, is still missing. In one of my recent episodes, I mentioned that Colonel General Sergei Kuzovlev, who was awarded the Hero's Star, what for, has disappeared. For the capture of Kupiansk, that very Kupiansk, which Putin was boasting about just a month and a half ago, claiming it was under Russian control. He even invited foreign journalists there. But now it turns out that 90% of Kupiansk is controlled by the armed forces of Ukraine, who continue to clear out the Russian ghouls. So this general, who perhaps received his award a bit too early, he reported to Putin and then simply disappeared after the armed forces began clearing out Kupiansk. And now Russian telegram channels are reporting that he was found dead back on December 17th. This information still needs confirmation, but I think the situation is very telling. You know, it's one of those cases where if the tea with Novichok didn't work, you had to go out the window. But that's not all yet. Lately, things haven't exactly been going well. It's been a very bad streak for Russia, to use the language of Russian propagandists. Strikes on drilling platforms in the Caspian Sea, the destruction of a state-of-the-art warship there, the destruction of a submarine in Novorossiysk, and strikes on chemical plants. Strikes on tankers of the Shadow Fleet and several aircraft have burned down just in the last few nights. In general, the armed forces of Ukraine are accomplishing the incredible, and Ukrainian drones are flying, swimming, and diving exactly where they need to go. And the ghouls in Russia have started to negatively survive. A detective story has unfolded in Russia around the death of one of the most notorious Russian neo-Nazis. The death of this neo-Nazi, the founder of the PMC Espanola, with the surname Orlov and the nickname and call sign Ispanin, has been confirmed. In terms of significance for Russian Nazis, this is simply the event of the year. This Orlov, is like an under-publicized Prigozhin. Well, just not as media savvy, but if enough resources were invested in him, if he were promoted a bit, he could easily by now shouting, "Gerasimov, Belousov, where are the shells?" At first, information came in that he had been detained in Moscow for arms trafficking. Just imagine that. And then it turned out that during his arrest, he was simply shot and killed in a shootout with law enforcement. So it turns out that a real denazification happened, the very thing Putin keeps talking about. But to go in order, who is this Orlov? A legend in the world of Russian football hooligans, one of the leaders of the CSK group, some of the most brutal fans of the 90s and 2000s. His nickname was the Spaniard. Where did such an unorthodox nickname come from? According to his own claims, in the late 1990s, he served in the Foreign Legion and fought as a mercenary. Somewhere in hotspots, an open neo-Nazi. Just look at his tattoos, his views, his rhetoric. In short, the classic story. But he resurfaced in Donbas back in 2014 to 2015. He was part of Bezler's group, Bezler nicknamed Bez, in Holivka, and he did what he knew best. He was squeezing out property. He hid metal in basements and terrorized the local population. PMC Hispaniola. Initially, it was a group of fans that existed in the Vostok battalion, but Orlov turned it into a real private army. They recruited football ultras there. They recruited skinheads there. The main requirement was to be a real right-wing Nazi and have fighting spirit. And Russia, which according to Putin is fighting against Nazism, officially promoted this battalion, which consisted of skinheads giving Nazi salutes. They didn't even hide their views, just like Rusisch, just like in PMC Wagner. Everyone was covered in swastikas, Nazi symbols, and tattoos. Now, the most interesting thing is who was paying for this whole party. Because many noticed that the fighters of this PMC Espanola were some of the best equipped and outfitted. This is what's really interesting. Who was paying? It turns out this PMC was under the protection of the Rotenberg brothers, who are childhood friends of Putin. According to investigations by Russian media, all of this was paid for by the head of the security service of Russian railways, a man named Schendrik. And Schendrik is a Rotenberg man, so everything is clear here. It turns out that Hispaniola was indeed considered one of the best equipped units. They had the best sniper rifles, drones, electronic warfare equipment, expensive pickups. And among Russian Nazis and nationalists right now, there is just a sense of confusion. What happened? How could it be that such a respected person in their circles was simply shot? Somewhere in Moscow? And on top of that, he was accused of arms trafficking. I think it's actually very simple. At least I believe the following is the case. After Prigozhin's march on Moscow, Putin is terribly afraid of armed, experienced, and most importantly, organized and ideologically united military groups who are now starting to, and have already started to ask questions. And maybe they'll start to take action. There is some misunderstanding among Russian nationalists. Putin has disposed of more than 1 million, almost 1,200,000 Russians in this war. And now there are processes taking place that, from the perspective of a Russian nationalist, look like an absolute nightmare. Hundreds of thousands of migrants from India and Pakistan are being brought into Russia. So what is this, Putin? You disposed of Russians in the war, and now you're bringing in people who aren't exactly Russian. Ask the Russian nationalists. For them, it's truly a nightmare. Add to this. Recently, there was also a telling conflict between Kadyrov's men and another group of notorious nationalists, the Rusik Sabotage and Assault Reconnaissance Group. After that, the head of Rusik was simply forced to apologize to Kadyrov's men. What's going on, Putin? Who have you given power to in Russia? That's the question they're asking. So I think that in Russia they still can't even imagine yet what will happen when hundreds of thousands of killers, convicts, and skinheads, now only with the skills of killing and with weapons, return back to Russia. And with all these questions, to which there are still no answers to them yet, by the way, that's one of the reasons. Probably why Putin doesn't want to end the war like this. What is he supposed to do with them afterwards? He won't be able to pay them that much money. They're used to it, and their families are used to it now too, already. In Russia, thousands of crimes are already being recorded, committed by those who have returned from the front, and soon there will be tens and tens of thousands of such crimes. But in general, let me remind you, friends, that the best sons and daughters of Ukraine are fighting against these ghouls, against all this evil. Unfortunately, Russia is sending human trash to war, while we have real heroes. And in every program, we organize a fundraiser for our warriors. Today, we are continuing to raise funds for the legendary 24th AIDAR Assault Battalion. We are raising funds for the NRK Terikon. It's a ground-based robotic complex. AIDAR is currently defending in the Zaporizhzhia direction and doing so successfully. This NRK Terikon is a really cool machine, a kind of ground-based drone. It can carry up to half a ton of cargo and can perform tasks ranging from evacuation to clearing areas and transporting ammunition. It can even be converted for field engineering work, meaning it can be turned into a small field excavator or even a bulldozer if you attach special buckets to it. In short, it's an awesome thing, and AIDAR really needs this equipment right now. And the fighters have recorded a video message for you. Please take a look.
Ми, бійці Айдару, зараз працюємо на Запорізькому напрямку, де кожен день вирішує, хто повернеться додому. Щоб виконувати завдання без втрат, нам критично потрібні наземні роботизовані комплекси. Вони рятують поранених, доставляють боєкомплект і працюють там, де боєць просто не пройде. Борисе Тизенгаузене, звертаємось до вас та вашої аудиторії. Допоможіть нам зібрати те, що зберігає життя. Дякуємо кожному, хто долучиться до збору. Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Слава Айдару!
Айдару слава!
Let's help our legendary AIDAR fighters. The link to donate is in the description of this video. There are options for Mono, Privat, and PayPal for those who want to help from abroad. If you don't see the payment details here, there's always a QR code. And by the way, we recently completed a fundraiser for the 214th Separate Assault Battalion of AFU together with you. We raised funds for electronic warfare equipment and net launchers for them. They recorded a thank you video for you. Be sure to watch it. Please.
Бажаю міцного. Ми взвод наземних безпілотних комплексів 214-го ОШБ ОФОР. Дякуємо всім, хто доєднався до нашого збору на РЕП і сіткомети. Окремо хотілося б подякувати Борису Тізенгаузену та спільноті його YouTube-каналу, а також Волосянку Дмитру за вагомий внесок в наш збір. Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
In short, the equipment is already with our fighters. You are simply incredible. And every time I want to say a huge thank you to you. Thank you from me personally and from the hundreds of our defenders whom we've already helped. And another event happened just the other day. For me, it was unexpected, but pleasant and important. I had the honor of receiving an award from the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine for supporting the army, for assisting the military. From Alexander Sirski. This is precisely what the prestigious award truly looks like. Well, it was indeed very much unexpected for me, a truly humbling experience. I wholeheartedly dedicate this significant award to each and every individual who consistently helps and supports our brave defenders every single day, every single minute, without fail. This is our shared achievement and a huge responsibility. Your support gives me the strength not to stop and to do more and more. Together until victory and glory to Ukraine. It often happens that after talking about our brave defenders, we move on to news from Russia. And about the main ghoul himself, the wizard of the Brown City. Peskov came out, this mustachioed floozy, and said that Putin would be working during the New Year holidays since he has no days off and works constantly. Makes you want to ask which one of them will be working. Of course, to ruin Russia in such a short time, you have to work without any days off. Speaking of working without days off, for some reason I immediately remembered the story about the Kursk submarine. That story happened right when Putin came to power. You remember it, don't you? That absolutely idiotic phrase with that smirk, it sank. Back then I think anyone who saw it on their screens, I mean Russians, even the most die-hard Putin supporters didn't understand what he was talking about at all. Well, they didn't understand it then, and later on it didn't matter anymore. So, about working without days off, that's the moment I remembered. Do you know why? Because when it became known that the submarine, after a powerful explosion, and there was more than one, that explosion, it settled on the seabed, what happened then? A catastrophe, Russian submariners were dying there. Now we understand that it wasn't a catastrophe, but actually a good thing. Fewer submarines in the war with Ukraine. So back then, Putin didn't even interrupt his vacation in Sochi. He deigned to fly to Moscow from his vacation only after 5 days. This is in the context of what Peskov says, that Putin works without days off. The submarine is lying on the seabed, the submariners are breathing their last oxygen, knocking, trying somehow to save their lives, but no one is rescuing them. Foreign rescuers aren't allowed in, God forbid they see any secret technologies. Putin spends 5 days riding a jet ski in Sochi. This is how Putin works without days off. In general, if freedom of speech in Russia were like it is now, if the internet were shut down and all TV channels were under control, no one would even know about this submarine, Kursk, and anyone would be to blame. Ukro-Saxons, Anglo-Saxons, whoever else. Soon, Russia will have an isolated internet, let me remind you, and no one will know about events like this at all. Honestly, it's just astonishing. Instagram has been blocked in Russia, TikTok as well, and YouTube has been slowed down, so it's almost impossible to watch it there anymore. VPNs, which are used to bypass these blocks, are banned, but Putin's supporters still use VPNs, even though they're banned. They go on YouTube and leave comments here about how great Russia is and how it will defeat everyone. Yesterday, there was some kind of invasion of Russians. We and the team were actually watching them. Crowds of them were showing up. Putin will defeat everyone, Russia. Great, and quack, 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 and cluck, 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 and woof, woof, woof. Cap. They wrote in all caps with a bunch of exclamation marks. Don't you dare say anything bad about Putin. And why are you sitting here from Russia using a banned VPN, huh? Go right on the approved whitelisted sites that they've allowed you to use. Can you imagine how hard it is for them? They have to present this withered, botoxed jellyfish as a great geostrategist and macho man. And I watched that live Q&A with Putin. I analyzed it in previous shows where he talks to the deep people, the so-called deepinarians. And I want to tell you, now he just sits there. A mumbling, petulant, insecure, and embittered old man, ranting about imaginary Poseidons and stormy petrels, throwing tantrums. He makes inappropriately stupid jokes. All in all, it's a pathetic sight. What 150 years is he talking about, the ones he mentioned to Xi Jinping? In a couple of years, they'll just be pumping him full of Botox for no reason. They'll inflate that mug of his so much, what will he look like then? He'll end up looking like a humanoid from old Soviet sci-fi movies. And to make sure there are no such comparisons, so that no one listens to things like that, Tizengausen says Russia needs to be disconnected from the global internet as soon as possible. That's exactly what they're working on right now. In one of the regions, Belgorod, there's a minister of public communications named Oksana Tarantova. She told representatives of the local media that if they keep writing about internet outages, then, and I quote, everything will be cut off in the region. In other words, if you write that the internet is down, we'll cut everything off for you. Good evening, as they say. By the way, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Here, we're not only fighting against the rotten Russian propaganda that Putin spares no money on, but we're also exposing lies. This nest of dictatorship, this gang, so subscribe. Let's see how many of us there are. And Orban is here with us too. His bipolar disorder caught up with him, and he came out with a statement that if Ukraine falls, it will be a catastrophe for Hungary. Seriously? What happened? Did your paycheck from Moscow not get deposited on time? What kind of statement is that? Let me remind you, by blocking aid to Ukraine and blocking sanctions against Russia, Orban is actually doing everything possible to weaken Ukraine. But in one of his interviews, he let it slip that he wouldn't want his country to border the Russian Federation. Oh dear. So for Orban, the catastrophe is that, in his view, the buffer between Hungary and Russia would effectively cease to exist. If Ukraine falls, not going to happen. Ukraine will not fall. Ukraine has shown the whole world that it fought back hard. By the way, Ukraine is that very last nail in the coffin of Putin and in the coffin of Russia. At least in the sense that we know it today. After this war, all those consequences, not just the economic but also the social crisis, will tear Russia apart from within. And I'd like to remind Orban that Ukraine is a very peace-loving country, but we have a little black notebook where we write everything down. And then we'll ask for answers. And now let's move on to international news. Like before. The program? Let's move on to international news. In the US, an oil tanker has been seized for the second time this month. It had departed from Venezuela. This was reported by the US Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, and she, I quote, stated the following: "We will find you and stop all tankers transporting sanctioned oil." Previously, the US would simply blacklist tankers, which caused some issues with insurance and ports, but the tankers still transported the oil. They would just transfer the oil at sea from one tanker to another, turning off their transponders, but an actual seizure is a whole different level entirely. That is, the confiscation of an asset worth tens of millions of dollars, and the cargo itself is also worth tens of millions. Of course, no captain or shadow ship owner would want to risk their vessel, especially not play games with the US Navy. So if the US Navy starts hunting, the freight rates for transporting oil for Venezuela will just skyrocket, and I think the carriers will simply refuse to transport it. And as for Maduro, I would be curious to know just how many of these ghost ships he actually has in total. The Venezuelan shadow fleet is smaller than the Russian one, but it's closely intertwined with it. That is, the same tankers can transport both Russian oil and oil from Venezuela. Maduro has up to 60 tankers in his shadow fleet. These are constantly operating on the Venezuela-China route. Plus, there are situational vessels that transport Iranian, Russian, or Venezuelan oil as needed. 90% of the buyers are in China. Through intermediaries, private refineries, the so-called samovars. So what is Maduro's regime built on? The structure of the budget, and it's just beautiful over there. Foreign currency revenue is 95% from oil sales. That's the money for military salaries, the main support of the regime, and handouts to the population in the form of food boxes. Maduro has brought the people of Venezuela to such a state that they put up with him for a box of food. Those who didn't want to tolerate it, millions, have left, and the rest, on the one hand, are waiting for these handouts, and on the other hand, they are kept under control by both the military and the colectivos. These are basically gangs who are also on the payroll. Maduro's people arrive on motorcycles and pickup trucks and quickly deal with dissenters. The second item in the budget is that very same blood gold. Illegal mining in the Bolivar state in the Amazon is taking place, overseen by the military and gangs. It brings in about 2 to 3 billion a year, all under the table, of course. And then there's the third. A way of making money. I'm not revealing any secrets here. It's the same thing Donald Trump is fighting against now. Drug trafficking, the cartel of the Suns, and more. The Venezuelan generals are directly involved in the transit of illegal substances from Colombia to the US and Europe. That's billions of dollars, but they end up in the pockets of the top leadership and generals, not in the country's budget. That's why the blockade is a death sentence for the regime. Maduro. In other words, it's just a trap. Venezuelan oil has one very interesting characteristic. It's extra heavy. In terms of consistency, it's like bitumen. And in order for it to become oil, as we usually understand it, it physically can't flow through pipelines. So to extract and export it, it needs to be diluted to a state where it can flow through pipelines. For that, you need diluents, naphtha, light oil, gas condensate. But Venezuela itself produces almost no light oil. It doesn't extract light oil. It imports these diluents from Iran or China. And the essence of the blockade here is that not only is the fuel Venezuela buys being cut off, imagine the largest oil reserves, and yet they have to trade oil for fuel with Iran. And on top of that, these diluents as well. So in fact, all of Venezuela's oil wells will simply stop. They'll get clogged with this bitumen without the diluent. They're also blocking the diluents. So, I don't know, maybe a few months probably. Plus they've blocked it off. Drug trafficking, so two main sources of income for Maduro's regime have been cut off. Can they get around this blockade? I doubt it, I really doubt it. That is, Maduro doesn't have a safety cushion like Putin does, like the National Wealth Fund. He basically lives hand to mouth. He sells oil, buys food, pays the army. Yes, he does have some of his own. Some, that is savings, everything that has been accumulated, as they say, through hard work all this time, but he definitely won't spend those on his military and on food for the population. So, according to experts, in 3 to 4 months, a severe fuel collapse will begin. And in 6 to 8 months, there will be a hunger riot and a revolt of the generals. They also stopped receiving income. Well, now they're going to lose both. So that very block. When I was reading about Maduro, I just thought how crazy dictators really are. Indeed, their small cuckoo ensemble simply goes off to a place quite remote, very far away. Unfortunately, it's not possible for the people of Venezuela to oust Maduro because he still has the support of gangs, colectivos, and the military. But people there really, really hate him for what he's done to the country. So, a few details to help understand this character. Maduro, who is he really? In 2013, he seriously claimed that the late Hugo Chavez appeared to him in the form of a little bird. Quote, "It whistled at me, I whistled back, I felt the spirit of Chavez." After that, he repeatedly said that he consults with birds. So it feels like he's not just involved in smuggling, but also in using certain substances. Is he also spending the night in the mausoleum for some reason? This is yet another chapter in Maduro's life. To absorb wisdom, Maduro admitted that he sometimes spends the night in the Museum of the Revolution, right next to the sarcophagus containing Hugo Chavez's body. Apparently, he was waiting for some kind of instructions from the other side. By the way, I wonder if Putin ever spends the night in the mausoleum with Lenin. Maybe he soaks up some information there. Maybe he asks him, why did you create Ukraine? Or, I think that Putin is already more or less in that state. In 2019, Maduro stated at a press conference that he had traveled to the future and saw that everything would be fine. And he came back to tell you, those who were present at the conference, about it. Judging by today's events, he arrived a little too early. That is, not at this time, but a couple of years earlier. Maybe at that point everything was still fine for him. And then just little things like that. Maduro moved Christmas to October twice in order to distract people from hunger and protests. And on state television they even show a cartoon called Super Mustache, where the main character, at first I thought it was about Lukashenko, right? By the way, Lukashenko, take note. Housewives, take note. Klubniliki, listen to the program and, as they say, take it to heart. So, the cartoon Super Mustache is shown on state television, where the main character is a superhero with a mustache who looks like Maduro and he flies around. He has an iron fist in his cloak, he fights against the Empire, the USA, and drones. It's just some kind of combo already, and then there's his sense of humor. In one interview, when a journalist asked him about the food shortage in Venezuela, about people starving, Maduro made a joke live on air. The Maduro diet makes you as tough as a rock, and he laughed very hard. It's especially funny considering that in reality, many people are starving and families can barely make ends meet. Against this backdrop, Maduro visits a famous restaurant in Turkey. Remember the one with that chef? He sprinkles salt on the steak with his hand like this, and the steak costs several $100s there. And then this caused outrage in Venezuela. Well, never mind, Maduro, your super mustache will save you. In short, the blockade of oil tankers will remain in effect until Maduro's criminal group returns all the stolen American assets. This was already stated by the US Secretary of War, Hexet. What assets did Maduro steal? Now, that's interesting. Trump and Hexet, Trump also said, return what you stole. Trump and Hexet are referring to the nationalized property of American companies. The main complaints concern events from 2007 to 2010, back when it was still Hugo Chavez and Maduro. With Maduro's support, the assets of the largest oil companies were effectively seized. American giants. In other words, oil fields and infrastructure were taken over successfully. Later, all of this fell into decline, but in some places it didn't, and that's where Maduro is still trying to extract his oil. So, in the Orinoco River Basin, the Chavez government expropriated American property, land, and extraction rights. That's why Trump says, you'll give everything back right away. And I don't know if Maduro can return it now or not. And the total amount of claims with interest is in the billions and billions of dollars. Venezuela has lost numerous international arbitration courts, so Caracas is obliged to pay these billions of dollars, but Maduro doesn't want to. In short, he's caught in a serious trap. Well, it's not just him. Putin is pawning Russia's gold. Here, I don't know. All this is coming out on Russian websites. China has set a record for importing gold from Russia. If Russians add 2 and 2 together, what do they get? In November 2025, China bought a record amount of gold from Russia, almost $960 million worth. This is the largest deal in the entire history of bilateral trade. High volumes of deliveries have been recorded for the second month in a row. And in October, Russia sold gold worth $930 million to China. It sold it off in China. All in all, in the first 11 months of the year, China imported almost $2 billion worth of gold, which is 9 times more than in the same period last year. So what happened? One wants to ask why. Is Putin dragging Russia's gold to China? Oil isn't feeding them anymore. It's dropped. The price of Urals oil has fallen, foreign currency revenues have shrunk, and the war demands billions. There's a yuan shortage. Russia needs yuan to buy equipment, drones, machinery, consumer goods, all sorts of electronics from China. Previously, Russia had enough yuan from oil sales. Now oil is getting cheaper, and there isn't enough yuan. Putin has cracked open the gold reserves, sending physical gold to China to exchange for cash to cover the deficit. In other words, if they're already offloading gold on a large scale, that means the liquid part of the reserves, the paper assets that could be sold, is close to being depleted. There's not much real money left, so they had to dip into the vault with the gold bars. Yes, it's Putin's economy. It won't collapse tomorrow or the day after, but all these signals show just how much he's lying. The Botox jellyfish, when he claims he can wage war forever, maybe he himself can, but his economy clearly disagrees. And you take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones, subscribe to this channel, and I ask you, let's help our legendary AIDAR. They really need our help right now. Oh, how much they need it. The link to donate is in the description of this video. Have a peaceful day and glory to Ukraine.